Hey everybody, Pastor Scott here, offering our quick response video for our last week's lesson on exile and return. You'll notice I'm in a bit of a strange location today, not sitting in my office like I often am, thanks to the snow day that we have had the last day and a half. I can't even get into the office yet because the snow is still there. So just working out of the house. So that's why my backdrop, I should say, looks different. That's what's going on. A couple of things that I just wanted to comment on. One of the questions we had is, what does the word exile mean to you? Exile is, of course, what we refer to with the Israelites being taken from their homeland, the promised land, and being taken to the location where their conquerors had desired or determined that they would go. So there was the Assyrian exile, and then later on the Babylonian exile that we kind of talked about. Now, I asked you what you guys thought about that, and you sort of talked about it being a really harsh thing, kind of a hard or dark time for the people when they are taken away from their homes. So yeah, that's exactly what that is. One of the other questions that we asked is when God's anointed one, what is the term for that? And you kind of listed off some different things like the disciples or the prophets or God's servants, and those all good answers, but that's actually the term Messiah. If you remember, we talked about that, which might be a little strange to think about. If you remember, like King Saul and King David and King Solomon, they were all anointed to be the leaders for God's people. And in this case, it is the foreign king, King Cyrus, who is anointed and is God's servant, which is kind of a strange thing to think about, but yet there we go. So that's why we brought that up. Some of the different things that you thought were odd that I appreciated. There was a comment about how it's strange that following the Babylonian captivity, that some of the people chose not to go back to Israel. And remember that they had been there for about 3 generations. So the people who were actually given the freedom to go back, that was the only place that they had ever known. And so while their ancestors or while their people might have been from somewhere else, this was essentially their home. And so maybe it starts to make a little bit of sense why they wouldn't necessarily just say, hey, let's pick up and go off to this place where we've never been, we're not familiar with, and basically start over. So some wanted to, but some didn't. And I can kind of understand that. If you think about the idea of I think about it from the perspective, so we moved here to Underwood about 8 years ago. My wife and I, of course, remember things before that, and our kids do too, but they have basically grown up here. So this feels like home to them in a way that's maybe a little different for me. So that's just one way that you could maybe sort of think about this. One of the other things that you thought was strange is how the narrative seems to be a little bit mixed up in terms of the order of the books of the Bible. And yeah, that is kind of strange, but that's kind of a common thing when the narration pops up. Sometimes it does really seem to jump around. We'll see that even when we move into some of the minor prophets, those brief readings, they're actually placed in the Bible after the major prophets, but the timing of when they were active is different. And we see the same thing in the New Testament as well, especially when we get into some of Paul's letters like Romans and Corinthians and Thessalonians and all of those different books. We kind of see those mixed up timing wise as well. And then sort of the last things that you thought were a little bit strange or was kind of weird or amazing was that they were able to build the walls so quickly. And yeah, that is very, very strange to consider that they were able to do so in such a speedy fashion. Truly, God was blessing the work that they were doing. Thanks for your feedback. Looking forward to another, our next lesson that will come up here at the end of the week. Also, quick reminder, I think I mentioned this in our video on the end of last week, but if I didn't, we are anticipating resuming our in-person class on February 14th. So that's a couple of weeks down the road yet, but that's sort of what we're looking at, and we'll continue to communicate that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.